Well, as I always say, everybody, welcome sport fans, welcome sport fans, welcome to our IFE Live virtual program. I'm Coach Kathy Kemper, the founder and CEO of the Institute for Education. And our mission is to harness the power of data, innovation, and soft diplomacy in the global community. And we've been doing that for over 30 years. Today is historical because we are kicking off IFE's newest program, The Future of AI, with IFE's founding AI diplomatic steward, His Excellency Stavros Lambrinidis, the ambassador from the EU to the United States, and program founder and IFE steward, the Honorable Dr. R. David Edelman. Welcome and thank you. We have great expectations for this inaugural program. And welcome to our extraordinary and plenipotentiary ambassadors joining us. We have the ambassador from Albania, IFE's diplomatic steward, the ambassador of the Kingdom of Belgium, John Arthur Regibo, Brazil, Cameroon, Iceland, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Nicaragua, Panama, Slovenia, Sweden, and Uruguay, as well as diplomats from the Czech Republic, Gabon, Madagascar, Portugal, and Romania. It's wonderful to see the awesome Joshua DeFrancis, director of the White House Presidential Innovations Fellows Program here, along with so many of our civic tech superheroes. Thank you all for your civic tech service. And before we start, let's have IFE Senior Fellow Kaivan Schroff load us up with all the right social media hashtags and handles. Kaivan?
All set. They should be in the chat.
Oh, great. Good job, Kaivan. And now, IFE's founding AI diplomatic steward, my great friend, EU ambassador to the US, a bicyclist par excellence, and a wife, Phoebe, with a killer tennis forehand. Stavros, take it away.
Kathy, thank you so much. It's such an honor for me to be the IFI's diplomatic steward on artificial intelligence and to be kicking off this inaugural event, as you're saying. There's so much to say. Artificial intelligence, of course, will change the way that we learn, we communicate, we participate in democracy, we keep healthy. There's virtually no aspect of our lives that will not be affected. And when I say our lives, I mean human lives. And so for us, and for me personally, and for us in Europe, what it means really to be human and what it means to have artificial intelligence, enhancing the human experience, and what could be, on the flip side, the dangers of having it detract from it, have been at the forefront of my thinking. This gets even more complicated when we consider that the biggest innovations in recent times, and certainly in the future, will be ones around technology. How do we harness the power of technology for the good, for humanity, for everyone, without discrimination, while ensuring that humans remain in the driver's seat and while ensuring, in fact, that our lives become better? As I think about this issue, there are two things that fundamentally jump in my mind. The first question that I try to answer is, how do we ensure that that it is human beings that determine what the right use of any new technology is, as opposed to the mere existence of a new technology determining its uses? And that is a very important question, because technology is being produced, created so fast by so many brilliant minds that it becomes almost inevitable, and sometimes we even see this, that its mere existence then makes everyone scramble to see, to have it applied, as opposed to even go a step back and think, should we, and how should we? It is not a fair example or comparison, but nuclear energy was a major innovation decades ago. And we decided that it had a tremendous potential for good, but also tremendous potential for bad. And then we started thinking of ways to, in an international level, to regulate, to ensure that nuclear weapons, for example, would not be okay, but nuclear energy might be. And the second question that is always in my mind has to do with the rights, that have to be the same online than offline. And again, what is it to be human if not primarily to ensure that one can protect and promote one's rights, human rights? And how is it that new technology can affect that? Two quick examples, and perhaps let me stop there. I'm not even sure I have the answer to them, so I'm not even sure that I mean, they sound interesting in my mind, but maybe someone will jump up and say, "Oh, that's a silly example. Come on." But I mean, okay. So when it comes to the use of technology, who determines the use of technology? So who came? So a question I've had, and I was driving my car the other day, and I love driving. Honestly, I've loved doing it for a while. Who decided when that self-driving cars have to be a thing for the future? Who made a decision? Was there some popular uprising asking for self-driving cars? Did we forget how to drive? Did we think that it was just so important that we give up all control over our vehicles to some satellite and some scientists? And how important is it to have self-driving cars? We're in Europe. We moved in that direction a few years back because of safety concerns. We thought, okay, cars have to be safer. And then we started developing some technologies, the technology that makes sure that your car doesn't, bump into the other car ahead of it, automatic braking systems, or technology that says, if you get out of your lane, maybe there's a beep. Okay, that still allows you to have control of the car, but it makes sure that you have fewer accidents, perhaps, and fewer deaths. But how do we go from there to deciding that eventually we're going to have a car in which we just sit and then we do nothing as human beings in that car? It brings my mind back. In the States, the reasons were different. There were not so much safety reasons, I guess. It was a technological innovation side of the US industry, technology industry, that saw an opportunity of the car, yes, potentially being safer a little bit, but also becoming an area in which technology could interact more with a human being. Maybe if I don't have to drive, I can just look at my emails in my car, and I can look at other things, and I can do other things. My car suddenly becomes an extension potentially of my office, an even bigger extension of my office than this thing has become. Is that good for human beings? Who makes those decisions? So technology is out. We know for a fact that GPS and all those things will allow us in a few years' time to be able to sit in a car and then touch nothing and move. But boy, especially in this country, a car is such a demonstration of freedom, right? I mean, I grew up looking at movies where a car was the main protagonist. The feeling that a car gives you, that freedom as human, it's freedom, the ability to control things, an element of humanity, of what makes us human. And so how should we consider what human is? How should we consider what a new technology does to that humanity? And who should consider it? And that brings me to the second dilemma. I mean, I've said this many times. I've said it back in 2008, 7, 9, back at the European Parliament, when privacy and data protection were not that hot topics, especially in the US. So we need to fight terrorists, let's say, right? So you need technology for that, and a terrorist, maybe conspires at the corner of some street in some potential town. So you need to put a camera there, and we have the technology for that, and that's good. But then maybe they see the camera, they move to another corner. Well, don't you want to fight terrorists? Yeah, yes, I do. Well, then, why don't you accept another camera in that other corner? Okay, maybe I do. And then eventually, well, maybe they will not conspire on the streets anymore because there are too many cameras that do it in living rooms. Well, okay, but now technology has these very, very small cameras. You can't even see them. Why don't you just put a camera in every living room? Oh, that's a major violation of privacy. Well, why? Do you have anything to hide? Are you a terrorist? No, I'm not. Well, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. What's the problem? I mean, salami slicing rights is very, very easy. We've seen it happen, especially after 9/11 and on. Who makes those decisions? Is it governments? Is it companies? Do they have to be, do they have to be laws and regulations? Can they be a different kind of private-public partnership? These and other questions, I'm sure, will be discussed today. I am fascinated by this opportunity for this launch. I am grateful to Kathy and David, a brilliant man whom I met couple of years ago and have been learning from ever since, for your leadership in this, and for our amazing speakers. Thank you for coming to this program, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I know I will.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ambassador. Thank you for that wonderful, as we call it at MIT, provocation. Wonderful words to begin to kick off our conversation. Thank you to the delegation for hosting this series and for being our AI diplomatic steward. This is a tremendously important effort and just delighted to be a part of it. I want to thank the Institute for Education, which for over 30 years has been bringing together conversations like this one on topics that are timely, that are innovative, and that bridge the global divide to help bring us closer together in dialogue, in civic dialogue. I would be remiss if we didn't take a moment and acknowledge that in that 30-year history, IFE lost a tremendous asset in the last year, and just recently in the passing of IFE founder Jim Valentine. Those of you who may know Jim Valentine, Jim was larger than life, a truly exceptional individual, someone who knew how to bring life to the party, conversation to any room, and was left a lasting impression across this town and indeed the entire country. And we take a moment to recognize just that great loss that we all will have and will leave a hole in our hearts. I want to take a moment, Coach, if I could hand it back to you, if you have a few words you'd like to say.
Well, thank you, David. Thank you for acknowledging that. Yep, Jim was a great visionary. He was also loads of fun and the most curious, innovative guy in town. I want to thank so many of you that took time to text me or call me. And if I didn't answer the call, you kept at it, and beautiful cards and things like that. They really do mean the world to somebody when you're in deep sadness. So I want to thank you all. And for many of you that support the Institute for Education and sent in generous donations in Jim's memory, Robbie Valentine, Lauren Palo, Jackie Cazell, Josh DeFrancis, John Paul Farmer, and Britt, David and Joe Edelman, Kyvern Schroff and his family, and Amy and Todd Gang and Todd Park. Thank you all. Those donations, all go to computer science at SC for underrepresented student populations learning computer science, trying to change the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Coach, and thank you to Jim for giving us the reason to be here. For those who haven't had a chance to take a look, in the chat right now are a number of beautiful tributes that friends provided of Jim to give you a sense of the person and the legacy that he will leave. So with that, we should go ahead and get started with our program. And we are incredibly honored today to have two fantastic speakers who are going to advance this conversation. Their bios are already in your program, so I'm not going to give a tremendous list of their accomplishments. But first we have Peter Fatelnig, who is the Minister-Counsellor for Digital Economy at the Delegation for the European Union to the United States. And what you might not know about Peter, despite his incredible intellect, his tremendous responsibility for all these issues, and his clear communication, is that Peter wanted to become a professional skier, and indeed was down the road to becoming a professional skier before he shifted to what he describes as Plan C, which is a distinguished career in the diplomatic service. So maybe we'll have to save skiing questions for the Q&A, but nonetheless, thank you so much, Peter, for joining us. And we're also joined today by Julie Shah. Julie is Associate Professor of Aeronautics and Astronomy at MIT, and also Associate Dean of the Social and Ethical Responsibilities of Computing. How's that for a mouthful? But a first of its kind title, as far as I'm aware, Associate Dean of the Social and Ethical Responsibilities of Computing. Very timely for today. Also at MIT, that's at the Schwarzman College of Computing. And the fun fact about Julie that I would like to embarrass her with before we get started is not even that embarrassing of a fact. Julie once participated in a NASA expedition to the high Arctic Circle. So while those of you believe that academics get to go on boondoggles, I don't know, that's Minnesotan, that's a little chilly even for my taste. So nonetheless, thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. We're going to talk a little bit later about Julie's book as well, which I believe Coach is holding up now. Julie is the author of the newly released What to Expect When You're Expecting Robots, a fantastic book along with Laura Major that she co-authored, and then I can highly recommend to all of you really put some of these issues into perspective. And so today's topic, now that we can begin without further ado, is artificial intelligence in the human context. understanding AI's role in today's society and tomorrow's. And this is going to be part of a series, as Coach and the Ambassador mentioned, on AI in our society. And our hope for this series is to do a few things. First, to demystify AI. Look, AI is not magic, it's math and code. And hopefully we can, over the course of our conversations, demystify and unravel exactly what we mean. Second, to make it concrete, right? There's a lot of conversation about AI out in the air right now, and in some world where everything is AI, nothing is AI. We're going to get really concrete here and understand what this technology is and what it means for our lives. And third, and most importantly, our goal here is to shape the policy dialogue, as IFE has for 30 years on issues that are at the forefront, to give us a sense of what the responsibilities and the opportunities are of this new technology and technologies at our midst. And as the Ambassador mentioned, the stakes couldn't be bigger, right? AI has the potential to shape how we work, how you're hired, how we get loans, how we treat disease, how we think about current affairs, how we check in with our friends, even as the Ambassador mentioned, maybe how we understand our very humanity. But if this series is premised on one idea, it's that we have a choice. We have a choice, whatever our role is, whether we're engineers, as I know we have many on the line, civic innovators, investors, government regulators, members of the press, the general public, we all have a role. And that's what I'm hoping we'll get at today. And so let's launch right into the conversation. Julie, you wrote a book, so let's start with you. All right, we're talking about AI, and everyone here, I'm sure, comes from a different perspective and has read 2 articles about AI in the last week, both describing it completely differently. So when we're talking about AI, Julie, what are we talking about here? What are the core concepts that we need to actually know of as individuals to interact with this technology in our world?
Thank you, David. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all today. So I'm an AI researcher and a roboticist, and I'm a professor. So I guess I'll have to start us off with some definitions, but I'll make them quick. So what is AI? So, that's a question that AI researchers regularly argue and spend hours at length arguing. So that's an important thing, one, to know. But AI, it's a very general term. It's defining it as ill-posed, because when you're talking about artificial intelligence, you're talking about intelligence across many different dimensions. So for example, IQ versus emotional intelligence versus physical or embodied intelligence. And then across the other side, you can think about, evaluating performance on scale, speed, degree of autonomy, generality of the technology. And so there are many who will argue that a calculator is artificial intelligence. Just about everybody agrees that search, for example, Google search, search is the fundamentals of artificial intelligence. So when we talk about AI, we're also trained up as AI researchers to live and breathe the AI paradox. I don't know if anybody's heard about this before, but the moment one of these technologies crosses out into the world, into wider use, it's no longer called AI. And that's why all AI researchers have a chip on their shoulder, because we're always working on something that almost works. Like nothing we do actually works, because once it works, it's no longer called AI anymore. So Google search, the voice recognition, when you dial the operator, all of that is AI. So it's a large umbrella term. As a subset of AI, we have machine learning, in which a system is aiming to learn patterns, draw inferences from data without being explicitly programmed or coded. And then as a subset of machine learning, we have this field of deep learning, which is one of the areas that's receiving a lot of the headlines with great results in machine vision and in perception. And deep learning, as a subset of that, there's a set of tools and methods related to neural nets or deep neural nets. And I think one of the reasons I want to drill down with this is because when we think about deep learning and everybody talks about the impact it can have and its capability, there's this feeling of it's kind of magic beans, and none of it is magic beans. And that's critically important to understanding how to use it and how to harness it going forward. Like a deep neural net or a neural net, it's essentially a fancy function approximator. It's fitting a curve. And just like, we all know to be careful that correlation is not causation, these are building blocks for us for understanding correlation. And then beyond that, the techniques we have to investigate these correlations are really at the beginnings of their increasing in maturity. So we have very limited methods of understanding and investigating and interpreting and gaining transparency into these complex systems that are built of many, many curve fitters. And so I'll pause there, but that's just to place, many of the headlines in this broader context of, when we talk about AI in the field, what we're talking about.
All right, so we're fitting curves. Sometimes I say it's applied statistics, right? At the end of the day, you can usually call BS on someone if they're describing AI, if you replace the phrase with applied statistics. If it makes sense, they know what they're talking about. If they don't, it might be a little bit out to lunch. But let's make this really concrete. Peter, so you've been thinking about this, and you've talked before about this notion of tangible versus intangible AI and autonomous robots. So Peter, when you think about AI here and the applications for these innovations, what are you thinking about? What are the most sort of surprising or important uses of AI that you see today and maybe in the years ahead?
I'm glad. Many thanks for having me. I'm glad that you asked me about the real things in the real world, because that's mostly what I'm concerned with as a policymaker. Right now in this conversation, we talk a lot about social media and the use of AI in social media, or in facial recognition. Both of them fall into this category of intangible AI, where for a user, it's not immediately obvious that this technology is being used, as there is basically no physical representation of AI. That's all very good. But personally, and what I would like to leave here behind in this conversation is that I'm interested in an AI which actually adds to the productivity. Suggesting to me the next song in Spotify is quite nice, but it's not moving the world forward, So, and let me pick one area which is dear and near to my heart, which is agriculture. The use of artificial intelligence in making machines which can harvest fruit and vegetables. So the use in using AI in agricultural data, that's really cool stuff. And I would recommend everybody to go out a bit of a YouTube search in that area. Anybody who has picked tomatoes before actually knows how dangerous that job is. And it's not just pesticides and herbicides. No, actually the branches have little thorns and pines on there. So it's a very difficult job to do. So if we are able to replace humans in dangerous jobs, that is really something where we can make a difference. And then we go out into what all the work related to mining or the oil fields. There is also autonomous driving. I would like to I love a really good example comes to mind right now. In Norway, there are plenty of ferries crossing those narrow but very long fjords as a shortcut to driving hours around those fjords. Now that's not exactly a cheap operation if you have 100 of those ferries 24/7 in operation. And they have started replacing them with autonomous ferries. That's not just sort of cutting the person driving the ferry, that actually lowers the risk of incidents on those ferries, increases availability for citizens. And this is what we are looking for as a policymaker. I think these are really great examples. And there are many more coming then in medicine and in other areas where researchers start looking more careful in there. But a technology should add a value to society, and a core value of technology is increased productivity for us. I think we, particularly getting out of the pandemic, we're all looking for this sort of outcomes.
That's fascinating. And it's interesting. Oftentimes when we talk about this space, particularly with those that are at the forefront of AI innovation, they'll be the first people to admit that the most useful instrumentalities of this technology are some of the unsexiest, right? In the Department of Defense, people want to talk about AI weapons, but actually much of the work that's happening right now is on predictive maintenance to figure out when engine parts will break before they actually do. But you mentioned, Peter, a really important part that I hope we'll get to today and continue to, which is this idea of what jobs these machines can do. And of course, what we're talking about here is not just the algorithms, right? What many people think of AI, really the machine learning piece, but this interface between machine learning and robotics, which is squarely, Julie, where I know a lot of your research is. So Peter mentioned, replacing some of these dull, dirty, or dangerous jobs that exist. I know you were a lead in this future of work of the future task force, but dial back a little bit and help us understand what are these machines good at now? And what are they bad at, right? We read the Wired article, it can beat a human in the game of Go, and it was unbelievable, and it was so beautiful. But what's easy and what's hard for AI systems right now? And maybe that can help us locate the answer to some of Peter's questions.
Yeah. So, I've spent much of my career, thinking about these questions. So I work on developing novel AI models and algorithms that are developed especially to harness the relative strengths of humans and machines to enhance human capability and well-being. So, for example, I've deployed collaborative robots on assembly lines to work with people, to build planes, to build cars. Develop intelligent decision support for nurses and doctors, for supporting fighter pilots and doing mission planning. And these are areas where we have superhuman performance doing these jobs, but they can do with additional support in many different ways. And so the question is, how do you fit these pieces together? To the point earlier, moving away from this idea of technological determinism, this is not really a case where we just have to make do with the technology that's moving forward, but how we frame the problem for AI drives innovation in a different direction. The AI problem actually fundamentally changes when you frame it such that it needs to be developed to enhance human capability in some way versus supplanting or performing work independently of a person. And so, the way I think about this is, humans and machines, or computing more broadly, we bring different strengths, different capabilities. A human's innate ability, which is it's going to be a long while before a machine can take over, is our ability to structure an unstructured problem. Once we've structured the problem, a computer, machine learning can crush it. But we are not often very intentional in thinking about the ways that we structure the problems for machine learning today, or AI more broadly today. So, many of the advances we see, they rely on very, very large sets of labeled data, where a human is painstakingly labeling, millions and millions of images for this machine. And so even in, if you think about sort of object recognition, this is one that's near and dear to me as a roboticist. We have really excellent techniques that can identify and tag all of the objects on my table or in a scene, but those are trained from images off the internet, where again, we're structuring the problem for the machine, because when people take pictures, we frame the pictures. We bring our human attention selection mechanism to frame those pictures. And actually, when you take those same algorithms and you put them on a mobile robot that doesn't have those attention mechanisms and is just slewing through the space, those algorithms perform too poorly to be used in practice in many cases. And so I think the key challenge going forward is thinking about how we leverage the best of both, how we enable a person to drive the machine learning model or the AI model, how they're able to import or provide their creativity, their problem solving ability, and then leverage computation in support of that. And that requires re-envisioning the interface between the human and the machine, being able to move from labels as a very narrow means of providing structure to leveraging more natural modalities and means of communicating about the world. And that changes the AI problem. And so, yeah, I'll pause there.
So this very idea of sort of human-robot collaboration, I know you've done some really interesting research and have shown in cases decision-making in like a medical context, but even backing up one step from that, I mean, you mentioned this emerging job category that exists, and maybe not for long, depending on where technology is headed, of data labeler. Someone whose job is literally to train the machines. I think all of us have had this experience on some level, right? You enter your username and password and it says, prove that you're a human. And you have to prove to a robot that you're a human by helping it label data. Yet that is in fact one of those areas. And you raise a deep question I think the ambassador challenged us to think about here, which is even that job category, right? Of someone coming in every day and labeling for 8 hours a day to train machines. This is something that there are articles, the BBC wrote an article about this in the context of autonomous vehicles, and they sort of couched it as a kind of exploitation, right? It's in many cases, the folks who are doing these are in developing countries, they're coming in, but it raises a really interesting question about the nature of that work, because, is it that is an inappropriate, unfair, unpleasant job, Or is that equivalent to someone who is maybe working on a production line in an airbag factory, right? If autonomous vehicles end up potentially saving lives in the medium or long term, it might be a dull job, but it might be an incredibly important one. And I think we have to sort of dig deeper to think about how we as a society are recognizing our role in training these machines, in getting smarter, and then just as importantly, making sure that when we train those smart machines, they're actually enhancing where we are as a society. And that's where I want to get to, Peter, in the next question, because one of the areas that we've heard a lot about, of course, are the failings of these systems, right? So we want to collaborate with robots when they're right, but they also tend to be wrong sometimes. And obviously, look, machines break, technologies carry uncertainty, right? There's always the unknown. And so what I'd love to ask you to talk a little bit about is what's different here? I mean, why is it that the European Commission has devoted, I mean, one of Ursula von der Leyen's first policy directives was to develop a new AI strategy. This is getting a tremendous amount of attention in Brussels and indeed around the world. So why is AI different here? And what's the concern specifically about misused AI?
I'm tempted to give a one-word answer, but probably it deserves a bit of a longer. The one-word answer would be nothing. Because in fact, AI is dealt with exactly the same way as we deal with many other challenges of other technologies. In all the cases, we try to maximize the benefits and minimize the harms. And think about the technologies, similar general purpose technologies of the past. Stavros mentioned nuclear technologies. We have been dealing exactly with the same situation for a very long period of time. Not sure if we found the perfect outcome, but we tackled the question. Or a few years back, bioscience has posed quite a few questions for society and how we want to deal with it. And I think we are just here taking our time in reflecting on those questions. And the main risks here, the main risks related to the use of AI concern how we apply the rules designed to protect our fundamental rights. I think that's the core question here. It sounds a bit bureaucratic, but this is the issue we are talking. And for instance, personal data and privacy protection or non-discrimination are fundamental rights. They are not just sort of a choice. They are enshrined in our constitutional framework. But also safety and liability related issues are part of these considerations. And it's, of course, human decision making is not immune to mistakes neither. So we are used to that. Now, here comes the real issue, that the same bias when present in an AI, sorry, could have a much larger effect, affecting in discrimination many people, and without the control mechanisms we normally have functioning in a society. And that is the core issue. And now I would like sort of to reduce the conversation, in fact, that for the most part, the use of AI is probably not much of an interest for any policymaker or any conversation. You know, if Spotify doesn't get it right in recommending to me a good next song, I mean, who cares? You know, this has very little or no impact on the human, on an individual. However, there is a very small subset of applications of this technology which may have a huge impact on me as an individual. And some you mentioned already. I think you mentioned the financial sector. We spoke about health, but there is also judiciary, and there are a couple of other sectors where I think we want to be sure that higher quality standards do apply in those sectors.
So it sounds like it's really one of the charges to both government officials, but also to the press and us and the general public, is to help define what are those areas that are those high trust critical areas of AI where we have higher expectations. And of course, we have laws and policies that govern them, right? I mean, this is something that you know, many of us have written about before, and recognizing how do we apply one to the other. Julie, if I can put you on the spot, let me ask you though, so let's fast forward 10 years from now. Where do you think we run the greatest risk of the technology running out of pace, being completely incommensurate with that public trust? I mean, as you look at these machines and their capabilities and their limitations, are there one or more areas that really concern you and that should be the focus for that kind of policy attention?
Well, I'm not sure if this exactly, answers your question, but let me let me start with one of the things I'm worried about, sort of 10 years out. But even today, I think it's an increasing concern, and that's who stands to benefit from the technology, who has the means and the resources to benefit from AI, machine learning, and deep learning. The resources, the computing resources, the dollars, the human investment, the number of PhDs you have to employ in-house to understand a domain and develop one of these models that's useful is very, very substantial. And small companies aiming to incorporate this without an in-house, frankly, PhD, is not able to do that today. Never mind, gather the data sets, tailor them for their particular application, for their particular users. And that is something that greatly concerns me. And it's a fundamental issue of the technology as we're developing it today. And it's not something that is immutable. So reframing the AI challenge to be able to allow non-experts to tailor and develop models that are suitable for their applications is critically important. And that's our approach can't be to graduate more AI PhDs. And just as a point of context, big companies will talk about this too, the years it takes to develop an enterprise application. But I had to embed one of the best AI researchers in the world, now faculty at another university, for an entire year on a hospital floor to shadow the job of nurses and doctors to be able to identify the features that they're using in their decision making, to then be able to employ a machine learning model to provide decision support to those nurses and doctors. And so this is a major barrier to us being able to leverage the positive side of these technologies that I very much worry about.
So let me just follow up on that then. For the technologists, of which we have a number of public interest technologists on this call, what is the technologist's role here? We'll get to the government role in a second, which Peter sort of gestured at and teased out, and obviously there are others. But when you think about your students, PhD students that you're training, ultimately are going to go out into the world, they might work at companies, they might become researchers. What is their role in achieving this world? What do you want them to know?
Yeah. So, in training up our technologists, it's, they can't become an expert in every domain in which the general models they're developing are being used, but it's critically important they understand the barriers to the positive uses of the technology and the potential for the negative consequences of the technology at the point of conception and development. And that requires a broader training for our engineers and our technologists. It also requires giving them a language to communicate across disciplines and beyond academia. And so, in the context of the Work of the Future task force, in the manufacturing sector, again, you see, this is one of the reasons, I worry about this so much. We see this lagging adoption of intelligent robotics in small and medium enterprises, those with 500 or fewer employees, because of the integration cost in large part, because of the external expertise required to program, and then when the line changes, reprogram those robots. And by embedding our technologists through that task force to go out, do site visits, do interviews, build long-term relationships with these SMEs, it's changed research programs. It's led to new programs at MIT to specifically develop technologies to reduce these barriers. And we need more of this. We need this on the AI, the machine learning side, not just the sort of intelligent robotic side as well.
All right, so we're going to get to audience questions in just a couple of moments, so I want you to start thinking about your questions. But Peter, let's talk about when that doesn't work then, the regulatory and public policy side, which you gestured at in your last comment. So where is that need to regulate? When, where, how? I mean, we've talked, and the ambassador gave it an interesting approach to take autonomous vehicles, and the question of when and if there is to be regulation there. Now, in the United States, there is no pre-market approval requirement for autonomous vehicles, but they, of course, embody a lot of what we've been talking about in terms of autonomous decision-making, robotics, et cetera. Is there a way to think about when that right time is? I mean, is there one sort of message that you have to the regulatory entities around the world about how to pay attention to the space and how to get it right?
Yeah, I think as a policymaker, if you think about the AI as a system, a box, you essentially have three ways to craft regulation. Either you regulate the input into the box, you regulate what's in the box, or you regulate the outcome of the box. You can make prescriptive model for all these three, or one of the three. Now, we have had a number of years of conversations with all stakeholders worldwide. Just to give you a figure, we had more than 1,200 written contributions to our public consultation on that topic. There are hundreds of research projects ongoing in Europe, which also feed over the years into this thinking. Now, the outcome of this whole process is prescribing the outcome of an AI. That's not exactly how our society and economy works. Prescribing what's in the box is very often the first reaction, but it's incredibly difficult and actually in most cases doesn't work. So in fact, the choice the Commission has been making and what presumably now on 21st of April will come out is defining a subset of rules which apply for the input side. And the input side are developers and deployers of artificial intelligence. And those improved standards for the development and deployment, they actually may sound to you very, very obvious. And I just give you a few to give a taste. I mean, the first one is high quality training data which respect European Union rules and values. Of course, one would expect that. But also record keeping regarding the data, the algorithms, and the programming. Well, that's maybe a bit less obvious because in fact, companies evolve their products fast and it's not entirely clear what data the current AI has been trained on. So, and another one is training the robustness and accuracy of requirements we would like to introduce in such a regulation, and human oversight at the very end, but only, and that's a key word, only applicable to very, very few applications of AI where there's a high risk for an individual. And that's probably, I wouldn't be able to quantify that, but we talk about a small percentage or even less. So very, very few are really then concerned by these basically higher development and documentation standards, which frankly speaking, sometimes I wonder shouldn't apply to everything, but I leave that to others to judge.
And that will be the question of our era, is where does government put its finger on the scale? Where does it not? Where do engineers readjust the trajectory? Where do they not? And are we collectively up to the challenge of holding all of them accountable? I want to now move over to Q&A because we have some tremendous participants here with us today who have already put comments in chat. And I want to begin with Megan Smith, former U.S. Chief Technology Officer, who has been working on this space for a long time. I was privileged to call her a colleague for years back at the White House, and is already in the chat providing more additional reading material for those of you that want to follow this space. So a question, Megan.
Yeah, hi everybody. It's great to be with you, and I'm sorry we can't be together. We're all working hard on, and I'm thankful for our health workers and our vaccine progress. I just wanted to thank Julie for the point about training the students, and so I wondered if you could talk a little bit more, and others, how, the president of MIT, I'm on the MIT board, has talked about this idea of all students being AI literate. And that would be something that no matter what your field was, that you were AI literate. And I think it's very important, thinking about the computer science for all movement, starting in kindergarten, to make sure everybody is on the design side here. And I was really happy to see your point about cross-disciplinary. I found when we were in Silicon Valley, the engineers were in charge and all of other people, policy, were down here. And then we went to government and policy and comms was in charge and engineers were often not invited. And so this idea of stack ranking ourselves and bravado of who's, the technologists are more important, humanitarians are more important, the government. So just really thankful about your cross-discipline training, and it seems right on. And then also I'll just note, Coach asked me to mention that later in a future session, we may do some work with Kim Scott, who wrote Just Work, about how we can change our environments at work to be more inclusive, to do exactly what you were talking about. So I don't know if you had anything to share more with us about things the academy can be working on, as well as in our workplaces, which we'll get to later. And
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Megan. Yeah, so this is something I'm spending a lot of time and effort on currently in my role as Associate Dean of Social and Ethical Responsibilities of Computing. And social and ethical responsibilities of computing is one of three components of the new Schwarzman College of Computing at MIT. And our vision is a world in which social, ethical, and policy considerations are actively woven into the teaching, research, as well as implementation of computing. And we're experimenting, much like many other universities are, with the models for how best to do this. We know in training our undergrads and grad students that we cannot just give them a standalone ethics class and expect anything to come of that. And instead, we're taking an approach where we're aiming to seed and embed material from other disciplines related to social, ethical, and policy considerations into the core computing classes, such that done in a coordinated fashion, you integrate over 4 years, this content is inescapable to every student that we graduate. And by bringing the material directly and embedding it in their technological education, we show them how it's relevant and are giving them tools to go out into the world and to embed this in their practice. And that's a part of our engineering and our innovation process, is to bring this material almost like as a doctor would take a medical ethics class, and they need to practice it. What is the way our students, we're not going to train them up as philosophers, we're not going to train them up as science, technology, and society scholars, but they need to understand how that scholarship can inform and how they can communicate with those that have the right expertise, so that we can engineer technologies that better society, better human well-being. And we're making great progress in that. So this term, our 600 student undergrad machine learning class, every single week has what we call SERC, Social and Ethical Responsibilities of Computing component to its weekly lab. And so, we have content as well. So we have a new case study series that we just launched that I can put into the chat. 15-minute reads meant for a general audience, in particular for undergrads and practitioners, to be able to look at many of these issues from multiple angles, other than the ones they would get from their technological curriculum.
Thanks, Julie, and thanks, Megan. And also for those who are following the chat, Peter also put a very helpful course that apparently hundreds of thousands of people have taken, elementsofai.com. So recommended by Peter. Check that one out as well. For our next question, we're going to move over to John Paul Farmer, Chief Technology Officer of New York City. John Paul, over to you.
Hello, it's great to see all of you, and thank you everyone for taking the time to be with us today. Obviously, there are so many interesting, compelling uses for AI. Some of them that already exist today, a lot of them are not the ones that get discussed day in and day out. So I appreciate the acknowledgement of that. At the same time, we'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that there are harmful uses too. And those are happening today, and we're likely to see more and more of those as adoption increases. So my question is this: do you think that we currently have the institutions and the tools in society today to deal with and protect people's digital rights? I'm thinking here about privacy and safety and equity and accountability, the variety of things that we want to see in this digital age. Do you think we have the tools and the institutions to do that? And if so, which ones come to mind?
So Peter, do you want to start on that one?
Yeah. Now, I think what we see first, the technologies like AI, they're available worldwide. Now, the societal frameworks are different worldwide. So the response of China to the same technology will be different than the response of the United States and the response of Europe. There is the societal model, there's a historical element to it, there is a different a different appreciation of perhaps even similar values, but still they play out differently in those societies. The short answer would be no. And an example I give you that, for instance, if you just talk about privacy, well, I think Europe has made a huge effort over the last 10 years. We are just sort of at the beginning of building this institutional framework in Europe on data protection. We have a GDPR, but that's beautiful. It's just 97 articles, nothing else than that. Well, we have the data protection authorities. Yes, many of them nascent. We have a European Data Protection Board. Yes, but not necessarily staffed up to the level to safeguard those values. So it takes an incredibly long time. And I think this is what we learn here, that these technologies move with a fast pace, but our world to respond to it is much, much slower. And in particular, the policy world responding to it. So I don't think so.
Lots of work left to do. All right, we'll move on to next, Jeffrey Starr. Jeff?
Oh, sorry, I didn't catch on that we were verbally giving our...
No worries. It was a great question in the chat, though. So for those who haven't had a chance in the chat, please reproduce it.
Thank you. So my question focuses on integration of AI ML methods, broadly speaking, into the workplace. What are your recommendations, experiences with as we enter into an economy that will depend more and more on AI ML driven platforms, AI ML informed decision processes, benefits, et cetera, et cetera. What are your recommendations regarding how we can ensure some level of prevent sort of a have-not kind of economic environment in which some companies are able to afford to purchase or acquire the limited technical and methodological expertise to bring AI ML methods to a business versus those who might not be able to. We don't want to have a have-not kind of environment. And so wanted to know what your recommendations are for sort of regularizing that integration of workflow across the economy.
Julie, you want to take that one first?
Well, I think those are great questions. So I do see opportunities and paths forward on the technology side to help address that issue, and that's the starting position that I'm my expertise sort of sets me up to aim to be able to address, and that's looking at ways in which machine learning models can be developed and provide value, for example, without the very large data sets that sometimes are frankly not even able to be collected. I often say, many of the successes we see, they're kind of the low-hanging fruit. They're the easiest ones because they're the ones where it's relatively easy to gather large quantities of data and find some way on many people's backs to label it or sort of structure the problem for the machine. But many of the uses of AI, many of the most valuable uses don't fall into that category. It's very hard to collect data. There's no ground truth necessarily to be able to label. When you look at reinforcement learning, I can find almost no real, I should be careful what I say. It's very hard in many real world settings to be able to emulate or simulate all of the rules of the world and to be able to score the outcome of taking an action, which is what's required if you're going to use reinforcement learning techniques. However, we do have alternate ways we can formulate these machine learning models that are able to leverage higher level input from human experts, people that are not machine learning experts. And are able to guide the learning of these models. So for example, you put in partial rules of the road, and then you enable the system to sort of hypothesize or infer the additional factors or features in the environment that sort of explain the behavior that you end up seeing. And there's many possible quote unquote explanations for the behavior that you're seeing, but a person can help segment data or identify where behavior sort of switches. That provides just a few bits of input that can help the system very quickly lock in to a model that conforms to a human mental model of the behavior of a pedestrian or a car without these vast quantities of training data. And these new techniques I think are going to be increasingly important, not just to lower the barrier for for smaller companies to be able to enter the space and leverage these technologies, but also to make them more widely applicable in many real world settings. In the case where we've developed decision support for doctors and nurses, you do not have large quantities of data. It is very expensive to collect. You have no way to score. You don't know the rules of the game in response. Yet with the development of these sorts of techniques with tens of hours or a few hundreds of hours of observation of nurse decision-making, you can develop quite a high quality model of that nurse decision-making. Now, the flip side is you can't just say, a system that performs accurately is good enough. To Peter's point, you have to understand the harms that can be done by that system. And you need to understand how a person is supported in understanding when to rely on the output of that system and when it should not be relied upon. And that may involve tuning the performance of that system to emphasize false alarms or misses. Different types of errors can have different effects. And that you really need to understand the application, you need to understand the human factors. Definitely embedded in context. And I think that there are technological directions that can help address some of these issues.
And we're getting to our lightning round. We probably have time for one half of one more question. And for that, I want to turn to Greg Schmidt, who had a great question that picks up on that very point about trusting mission critical decisions to machines. Greg, if you're with us, please give us a quick.
Yep. Hi, I'm Greg Schmidt. I run a small startup, the longest standing startup in history, I believe. But I had the great honor of having Jim Valentine as one of my board members, which is probably why Kathy dragged me onto this call. And it's a huge loss for us as well as for everybody else. But we come across Julie listed the technologies, and deep learning is a subset of machine learning, which is a subset of AI. And deep learning is the basis of most of the speech recognition systems that are out there today. And one of the main criticisms of it, and Peter alluded to this as well, the same issue that Julie was talking about, which is it's not explainable. People don't really understand what's going on in the box in which these outcomes are generating. And I see that as a problem. It's obviously a problem for speech recognition, but it's not the end of the world if somebody says a bad word when they should have said something else and you don't know why. But it's really a problem if you have an autonomous vehicle that is, why did it drive under that white van, that white-sided truck? Is it because, as they hypothesize, it thought maybe it was the sky? But you don't really know because it's multiple layers of neurons that are being reweighted all the time, and nobody really knows why. And I'm just asking you guys, is there progress being made in terms of the explainability of deep learning? And do you see that as a problem that is surmountable? And obviously, the Boeing 737 is a good example of what can go wrong. If you have a system that isn't explainable, you suddenly have a machine that's a pariah, and you can set back the whole field for years.
So Greg, a great question that is subject probably to 2 more conferences of 10 days each, which we intend to host at some point. We're just about running out of time, but Julie, Peter, quick thoughts. Is there progress being made on this hugely important issue?
So, sorry.
Please go ahead, Julie.
So there's progress being made, but the tools we have today to inspect, interrogate, understand the performance of deep learning models, they're still very limited. So, for example, maybe a very quick but non-technical explanation to give you is that if this is sort of a fancy curve fitter, right, and then you want to explain fitting that very high dimensional curve, and you want to explain it with a few rules, you're gonna have to make compromises in that explanation. And it's not going to fit very well in some places or some other places. And so even if you've trained a classifier that is performing with 100% accuracy because of this trick, because there's fiducials in all the pictures that happen to have birds in them, our modern techniques should be able to identify that, and they can't. If you go down to explaining every single data point, you've lost the game again, because now you're explaining every single data point. And so you do have this tension. These methods are imperfect, and by employing these imperfect methods, harms can be done. So certain of these explanations will not be suitable for certain subgroups, and it's very important we understand which of those subgroups the explanation is disadvantaging. So while the field is progressing, it's not as simple as you just apply these techniques, you identify the salient features, and now you understand the model. We need to really treat these techniques with caution still.
And with that caution, Peter, in one word, are we cautious enough yet?
Not sure.
Not sure.
Not
and
sure.
on that note,
That's
on
the
that note of
politically correct answer.
well, there is no correct answer. You know, I'm afraid we're over time, and I want to thank everyone. This has been a fantastic beginning of what will be a long-term inquiry into these issues. Please join me in thanking Julie and Peter for your fantastic input, for all of your sharing your insights with us. Thank you to Ambassador Lambrinidis for kicking us off, and to all of you for being here today. It's been a real privilege to be a part of this really timely conversation. Thank you to all the friends from the Diplomatic Corps, from the US government who joined us, and from around the world. And we look forward to our next event coming up soon. Watch your inboxes. More to come on that. With that, hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Thank you. That's great. And hope we all see each other in person again soon. Have a great evening, everyone. Thanks
Get
again.
vaccinated up, get your vaccine, wear your mask.